We just ready to get rolling?
Yeah.
It's so good to be back in Pickleton. I could almost make the drive without maps. Almost. This time I came from the other direction.
Where are you coming from?
I have a hotel in Yakima tonight, so I was already over there and came back. I got another meet and greet in Zilla, Donald area?
Yeah.
Does that sound like the same general area?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good. I got some alumni over there. The Argo family, they are tree farmers over there, so I'm headed over there tomorrow night. But Argo. Hey, good to see you. I can even recognize some faces too, that's fantastic.
Marty, is that where you're gonna stand?
Probably, unless you need me or want me to stand somewhere else.
I just want to make sure you're on microphone.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Oh, hey, check that out. Would it be better if I stood up there?
No, you're
That'll be all right?
right there.
Oh, wonderful.
Good. Sit down early.
Fantastic.
How you started? That's more for Facebook.
Okay, I love
We
that.
can hear you here.
Okay, I'll kind of stand right here-ish.
Oh,
I love it. How about now? Can you hear me now? Uh-oh, this is starting the Verizon commercial. Yeah? Maybe? Yes? Talk, talk, talk? Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu. Oh yeah, okay, there we go. Good, awesome. Well, when I was talking with Scott about coming, I'm not sure, would I have met Scott before when I was here prior? Okay, was he newer to the area? Okay. Yeah, so man, it was all pre-COVID before when I was here last, so. Scott hadn't met me, so we were kind of chatting back and forth. And he originally contacted me just inquiring about different Jewish organizations, ministries that I knew of or had been in contact with. And so then when this tour came about and I knew I was going to be swinging through, I wrote Scott and said, hey, I'm going to be coming through on a Tuesday night. Like, I don't even care if it's just you and I, like if somebody wants to get together in Bickleton. And he said, well, let me talk to some people. He said, it's a Tuesday in the middle of farm season. So he didn't guarantee a lot. And so we definitely need to obviously pray for Scott, sounds like, and where he's at in the hospital tonight. But we didn't have like a plan. He said it might be a couple missions committee members, might be an elder or two, it might be a group from the church. And I said, well, we'll just get together and have fun, whoever it is. So I have no prepared anything tonight. We can just have fun and talk about whatever we want to, which is typical for me when I go elsewhere, which is usually not the middle of nowhere, Washington, but we'll get together in groups and just do Q&As. I love doing Q&As. It would feel weird probably in this context for me to do my typical 20-minute, although you can ask me any of those questions about ministry but I would love to tailor our time together towards what might be, whether it's just having fun and talking about, I think most of you were here last time I was here, so you've heard me talk. I think we did acacia tree here. Yeah. Did we do the trees of the desert here?
I remember that.
I remember that because I was just recently trying to pull up that slide in the middle of North Carolina. And I was like, I talked about this in Bickleton years ago. Find my slideshow. And I was trying to find the acacia tree, so it was funny. I just remembered that talk not too long ago. So it's not the first time I think that most of you have met me. I've even stayed in some of your homes. So, yeah, what could we talk about tonight that would be the most helpful? And anybody can take charge. At some point I just start singing and then somebody will eventually bring up a question. Or we can talk ministry, we can talk Jewish stuff, we can talk Bible lessons, life updates, family, it doesn't matter. What would you guys love to talk about? Somebody get us started.
Well, I would say, where are you at now, and what are you doing?
Yeah, so when I was probably living on the Palouse last time I came through. So June of 20, my family relocated to Cincinnati. We had been in Idaho our whole lives, my whole life. My wife was from Montana, Libby, Montana, just west of Kalispell, foot of Glacier National Park. That's where she's from. Gorgeous country up there.
So you got her to move away from
Oh, sheesh. Obviously, the only thing more gorgeous than Glacier drew her away. But yeah, so we had lived in Idaho our whole marriage. Had 2 kids. My kids are now 16 and 14. That's ridiculous, by the way. And that's coming from the guy who lives with them every day. My daughter's having a heck of a week right now. She got her driver's license on Tuesday. She bought her first phone on Wednesday. She got sophomore of the year on Thursday for a choir. She starts her new job tomorrow at Chick-fil-A, the Lord's Chicken. And then she just had an awards gala tonight for her annual musical and got a Rising Theater, whatever you call it, award. So that was a ton of fun. Anyway, that's kind of a little update on my family. We moved in June of 20 to Cincy because I had taken, I think the last time I was here, I was probably serving as president of Impact, and in that role. When I moved into that role, I still had a functioning student ministry. We were trying to keep up and going. That's where the podcast started, if you're following us at all with the podcast. The podcast started because I was starting to travel about twice a month, and that meant my students like, are you in town this week? Are you not in town this week? Like, what's going on? And so we started the podcast that the students could have their content every Thursday. Whether I was in town or not, they could count on that. And then we would do discussion groups when we got when I was in town. And that's where the podcast got started. I was moving to basically get more centrally located because flying out of Lewiston, Idaho twice a month was weird. It could have been worse, but it was still weird. That was a 5:15 flight back then. I don't know what it is today, but so driving from Moscow was early morning. But that was a little bit better location for travel, a little bit more central location just for cultural engagement, to be in the middle of the cultural conversation, to be influenced by the conversation, to influence the conversation. Part of it was we were planting a new team at the University of Cincinnati. They were all rookie campus ministers. So the idea was if I was there, they wouldn't screw anything up. I don't know if that was a good assumption or not, but that was one reason. Another reason was I wanted to start grad work at Xavier University. We could talk about that if that's interesting. I'm working with the Catholics. Thank you for laughing at that. That is intended to get a chuckle. And then part of it was a church I really enjoyed in Cincinnati and my family enjoyed. So we relocated in June of 20 to Cincinnati. And things are going great. We love what the city has to offer. We made new friends. What I loved is that my kids, I was worried my kids, I was like, this is where I screw up my relationship with my kids. My kids are going to hate me. But it was June of 20. Like, my kids were like, I am so sick of lockdown. Get us out of here. Like, we were, and we took off. It was good timing in a lot of ways. They expected to find new friends, which is a testimony to the church, universal, that we've been a part of. My kids have had a good relationship with churches. They just assume you're going to find new friends and make new friends, and they did. And that went well. So yeah, the only thing we miss is the scenery. I was talking to my wife before I lost service somewhere out here, and I'm like, man, even the not pretty parts are pretty out here. And I mean that in a good way. You know, you get off, you bail off the interstate there, and you start coming out, whatever it was I turned off, somewhere around, before Mabton, in between the interstate and Mabton. Did I say that right, Mabton?
Sunnyside.
And man, you start coming over those ridges and seeing, man, even the not pretty parts are pretty. So I just miss the scenery.
Before it all dries up.
Yeah. Time of year makes a difference, I'm sure. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know if that was enough of an update. Ask follow-ups if you want to, but that's where we're at, and what we're doing, and where the family is. Yeah.
So are you working mostly in Ohio then? So the college is in Ohio? Is that what-
We have a team in Ohio, and they work on University of Cincinnati. Most of our teams, we have 13, depending on how you want to count them, 13 to 15 teams around the country, and most of them are in a larger metro area where there's multiple universities. So our Cincinnati team is at University of Cincinnati. They're at Northern Kentucky. I'm over at Xavier. I don't really do. I haven't been on campus doing student ministry in probably almost a decade. It was shortly after I was here last, I would bet. And then we used to have a campus ministry 15 years ago up at Miami of Ohio, that if we can find a staff member to be on that side, we'd gladly reopen up over there. But yeah, I am gone about half the year. So if I'm home more than half the year, that's a good year. And if I'm gone more than half the year, it's a bad year. That doesn't always mean I'm away from my family. Part of the reason we moved to Cincinnati is I can drive to a third of the things I go to. And if it's a weekend gig or summer or spring break, my family comes with me, and they still want to do that. I asked my kids, I'm 16 and 14 years old, public school kids. I said, do you want, like, we can do whatever you want to. Like, we can go anywhere. We don't have to, I can do a couple speaking engagements. They're like, yeah, go do a couple speaking engagements in North Carolina. And I was like, okay. So they still want to do that. And so I'm not around a lot.
Are your teams though then, what kind of, I don't know, I just have this impression there seems to be quite a revival on campus.
There is. Okay, just in general, there is. I can talk about that, and I can talk about kind of our teams and what we're experiencing. That is for sure happening. The research is showing it. Barna's done research. Pew's done a bunch of research. Barna called them the open generation. I would say all of us have experienced that. This generation is very hungry and curious for a transforming experience with Jesus in ways that have not been true even 5 or 10 years ago of Generation Z. And all they want is authenticity. That's all they just want it to be real. And talk to me about what your experience is with Jesus. And that means we have to have an experience with Jesus that we're intimate enough with, and we can talk about with and articulate enough that's not showy or glossy. Like they're gravitating towards that immensely. And it doesn't have to be. I think 5 or 10 years ago, I wouldn't call it political correctness, but just like that generation was very social justice oriented. You had to say things the right way. You had to, this generation's like, I just want it to be real. Just tell me it's real. And talk to me about that. So you're seeing that. Ohio State University, obviously Asbury, everybody knows about the revival at Asbury. Ohio State University, the football players are leading a lot of that. And that's not just on TikTok, like that's the real deal. We're seeing it bounce around a lot of campuses. And our teams are seeing that on campus within our ministries, but outside of our ministries. There's a lot of pop-up, I would call it pop-up, I wouldn't call it revival ministry, but I'd call it pop-up worship ministry on campus. Small, little, organic, almost. It's not a church function. It's not a ongoing, like, crew meets here and has for the last 7 years. It's like this new group is pulling students in magnetically, and you're seeing a lot of that everywhere. So it's interesting. We're trying, we literally are doing calls. We have a monthly business call at Impact, and about every other month we're just talking about whether it's the research angle of it or what we're experiencing and sharing stories. It's really interesting right now and kind of refreshing. For somebody that's a cynic, I had to get over myself because I was like, this is just Christians wanting it to be a revival. And I was like, okay, something's going on. I need to be quiet and listen. But somebody was...
Campus ministries, or any of the work that you're doing, what is the interaction with the Muslim young people?
Yeah. I'm really lucky that some of our teams, within the last decade for sure, maybe within the last 5 years, really started leaning into a heart for international students that wasn't there 10 or 15 years ago for us. We didn't have an international like brand or flavor to the ministry we did, but the individual campus ministers started having some really cool experiences. Now we're trying to figure out how to bring in people. We're talking to one hire right now, trying to figure out if he can come in and help us, almost give us a department that helps all of our teams figure out how to reach out to international students. Most of those will be Muslim. Our Salt Lake team right now is probably one of the most vibrant international efforts that we have right now. And just a ton of Muslim, and he loves them. He loves them. And it's just a wild experience with how they gravitate and love to be there. Cincinnati, the team is connected to an international partner ministry, and we help host international dinners. Most of those students are Muslim. So, yeah, I don't know if I would be the expert to talk intelligently about a ton of that, but it's really cool. They just popped into my meet and greet on this trip. I was down in Salt Lake City. 7 of them popped over and said hi. Just, and they were like the most outgoing, like we almost had like our campus minister was there, and he was trying to, they had a service project, so he was keeping them moving, and they wouldn't have left. Like they would have just been like bubbly talking. You show hospitality and you show warmth to Muslim international students, and they will just love you to death.
But they're open to the message.
That's the part that it's always a little bit harder to discern. The thing that you're hearing with a ton of, I mean, the stories you just keep hearing from all kinds of ministries, and I'm sure you guys have heard it, is Jesus seems to be beating us to all the Muslim outreach, like he shows up in dreams and visions. And I mean, I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of that.
Heard, read a lot of those on,
Yeah.
on the internet, Facebook. And,
Yeah. It's all over. And so you have this conversation about Jesus, and they're like, oh yeah, I've met him already. You're like, what? Yeah, I met him already. He came to me in this dream and told me that I'd hear more about who he was. That's a weird, I mean, I don't have that as a strategy in our handbook, but I mean, that is, in a lot of ways, what I feel like the international ministries I've been connected to is you show a ton of hospitality, you open a warm community, because in their culture, that's what carries. It's not intellectual, like let me tell you about why this makes sense and why you ought to say yes to it. It was, I saw something I can't deny. I was a part of something that and that's what they're drawn to. And so, like we have one student that just moved back, and I don't think I think it's awesome that Tommy never pushed him to, are you a Christian? But he always kind of identified as a part of the group. And so now he moved back. He's in like this totally back, like Bickleton area of Pakistan. And he's meeting with Christian missionaries that are over there. And Tommy was kind of like, you get a read on where he's at now that he's at home culturally. But there's almost like this overlapping of my culture, my identification, this new thing I've learned, Jesus. And there comes a point where you have that conversation, I'm sure. But it's been pretty interesting to watch him go back, and he has the initiative. I want to meet your friends that live over here. Okay, well, they're Christian pastors. Yeah. I want to meet them. And so.
What's the most difficult student demographic group to really reach?
I mean, honestly, today I would hesitate before I say anybody, because I'm always surprised. It's whether or not you can put yourself. The hardest thing about connecting with students is they're so busy. And I don't mean just busy like this. And I don't know if it's what happened post-COVID. Things changed on the college campus, because your freshmen, when COVID hit, you had a freshman class that didn't finish their freshman year. They then didn't go back to campus for 2 years and ended up back on campus their senior year. So you only have one, otherwise so you didn't have a cultural handoff, and it changed the cultural dynamic of college campus. And there's almost, I just had a campus minister say on the call this week, they said, I can't think of a single student that doesn't have a job in addition to their full-time credit load. And they don't, I'm going to try to find them in whatever pockets they have in their schedule, but they have a heck of a time showing up. So how much energy can you put into one-on-one small group situations? I don't know if that's everybody's experience. I'm sure other ministries probably find ways to get around that, but I would say any student that you can build a relationship with, it's building the relationship a meaningful relationship, that's the biggest challenge. You build a relationship with any college student these days. And I feel athletes are obviously, take whatever I just said about schedule, crank it up 10 notches, and they're some of the hardest to build a relationship with because of the demands of their schedule and everything else. But our ministries tend to attract a lot of people that are on the outside, lonely, mums, or as we say in the podcast, outcasts, not your typical. They're looking for connection. And the way we do ministry with small group discipleship, they find these safe connections and a bunch of people that are kind of like them, kind of lonely outsiders like them, and they end up playing games every Wednesday night, board games or whatever. Just had a group, actually 3 Muslim students at our U of I group. Are they Muslim? Yes, they're from, I said Peru, and that wasn't right. They are from, oh goodness gracious. We have a whole program there. Nepal, not Peru. But they're Nepalese, and they, yeah, four Nepalese students, 3 regulars, and then 2 kind of outsiders that don't fit in anywhere, and they formed this community, and they just had their last gathering, their last game night of the year, this last Wednesday. Had some really cool photos. Brent Billings showed up and did his magic. Some awesome photos around the campfire. But anyway, yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions?
Now, your organization, there's another organization you're involved with, isn't there? Another mission?
So if you're thinking of BEMA, BEMA would be the podcast side of. BEMA was always, see, now I live in a weird world now, where everybody knows me because of the podcast, and they're unfamiliar because of the campus ministry. And so you keep trying to explain to everybody, like, I'm not just doing a Jewish podcast. Like, everybody kind of puts me in the same category as Bible Project. Oh, you make Bible study content, which is great, and I want to do that, but we're connected to campus ministry efforts, and most people are completely unaware of that. I think you guys know me from my relationship to Washington State and the Palouse, so you're familiar with my campus ministry, and maybe even less familiar with the podcast stuff. So the BEMA thing is the thing that most people know me for, and know us for, and we're trying to figure out how to leverage that and use that for campus ministry. Our big goal is going to be, so BEMA is basically just taking the Jewish perspective, and it's what we did when we were doing the trees last time I was here years. It's walking through the Bible, the whole thing, in 5 sessions, and then we kept going after that, but we did 206 episodes. We walked through the whole Bible from Genesis to Revelation. We did 11 episodes on church history, and we just kind of said, okay, how do you read the Bible, being informed by a historical lens? How do you read a Jewish Bible through a Jewish lens? How do you ask Jewish questions of a Jewish text? And that's the essence of the study that we created. And we were doing that for college students because college students wanted, one of the things I always tell people is you're never going to reach college students if you don't deal with the way that we use the Bible and the way that we have used the Bible over the last, especially the last 50 to 100 years. We're going to have to grapple with how we're using the Bible. That's going to be important to any college student. And so that's what we were trying to do. We're trying to give our college students an objective, academically rooted hermeneutic and let them go nuts. And then more and more people started listening to that. And so our goal has always been, so half of Impact loves BEMA, what I just talked about with the Jewish stuff. Half of Impact is like, I don't want you to ever talk about Jewish stuff ever again. Quit talking about it. I got a couple people who were like, you're bordering on false teaching. So it's all a big happy family. So we got half that's like any other church. We got half the organization that's like, we kind of use BEMA as curriculum, but half that doesn't. But the thing that all of Impact is trying to do is Impact was always trying to give people intimacy with Jesus. We call it the special sauce with a wink because we know it's corny. But The special sauce for us is our definition of success. For us, success is developing intimacy with Jesus in the context of Christian community. That's success. Not numbers, not ministry growth, not like developing intimacy in the context of Christian community. Intimacy with Jesus in the context of, that's success. Whatever Jesus wants, if you're doing that, whatever Jesus wants to do, he'll do it through you. John 15 is our key passage. Like, you will bear fruit. If you abide in me, you will bear fruit. Fruit bearing is what Jesus does. The only thing that we can control is whether or not we abide in him and have relationships with one another. So we try to give that to all of our college students. The podcast is a way that works for a lot of our college students, but other ministries might not be using that. But we're all trying to give them that intimacy with Jesus, believing that when they graduate, I think some of you had children that went to Washington State. So our ultimate goal in the future would be, do you have students that are there right now? Do you have kids that are there right now? No. You're the last child that was there, youngest one. Who was it?
Nathan.
Nathan. What was Nathan majored in?
Good question. Human resources.
Human resources? Okay. I'll roll with it. I'll do my best.
Marketing. Yeah.
Okay, marketing. Well, let's do marketing. It's going to be a little bit easier for my head. So our goal is that when Nathan graduates with a marketing degree, here's a story that I've been telling everybody. Sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. My dad has pulmonary fibrosis. He's got scleroderma, autoimmune disease. It collides to make for a really bad situation for him. My dad was one of those people that, back when things were going crazy, if he got COVID, he was probably going to die. He did get COVID at somewhere in 21. Barely made it. Probably shouldn't have, but he did. Was on this long road of recovery for about 9 months. Was on straight oxygen all day for about 9 months. He's starting to get off oxygen, and the doctor says to him, listen, I can give you a shot in your lower back. My dad sits in front of the TV before he got COVID and watches Price is Right all day. Like, that's my dad's life. TV, Drew Carey, Price is Right, boom. Sometimes Deal or No Deal, but doesn't like that show nearly as well. So Price is Right, and records it and watches it on loop. So then anyway, so he has this shot he can take in his back, and it will release some pressure and really increase his quality of life. Quality of life to sit and watch Price is Right all day. And the insurance says, well, we're not going to let you do the shot until you do 90 days of physical therapy. And so I was like, oh, stupid America and your big pharma insurance, blah, blah. And I was like, anybody that listens to the podcast knows, like, an empire, blah. And I was just really angry. And I had, when I was at WSU, one of the biggest programs there that students came through my ministry was PT. Physical therapy. And there's one thing that I learned through all my time there with all those students, and that is that physical therapists weren't real doctors. And so there was supposed to be a laughter at that. That was a joke. So I was like, physical therapy for 90 days. So we signed up for physical therapy so I could get a shot. This physical therapist came in. And you know how there are people that they know how to do their job, and then there are people that are really good at their job, and then there are there's people that find another gear, like a whole nother gear, right? This is one of those people. Like, this was not a 9 to 5 for this person. Like, they came in, their life, they believed that what they did healed people, made people's lives better. This physical therapist, my dad has a team of 10 doctors, which I love very, very much, like big, real doctors. This physical therapist saved my dad's life. He visited our house in Cincinnati a year ago, last May. My dad was never going to get on an airplane and go anywhere. Like, we knew when we moved to Cincinnati, my dad would never see our house. He came and visited our house, all because of the work of the physical. Now, here's why I share that. I can give my students intimacy with Jesus. I can give them the fire to read the Bible and have a good hermeneutic. I can give them prayer and intimacy with Jesus. I don't know anything about physical therapy. So our goal has always been to build some kind of program so that when our college students graduate, they get handed off to a vocational discipler. Somebody who understands their vocation through the lens of, what I do is holy, sacred work. So we've done this thing in the world where we've separated soil and spirit. Like, we've decided that the pastors are where the action is in the kingdom. The only reason pastors exist like me is to remind all of you that you're where the action is. Like, God's bringing shalom to a physical world. Farming is shalom to chaos. Like, you literally are taking a chunk of dirt, you're bringing shalom, you're ordering it and stewarding it, bringing shalom to chaos, bringing life out of that. Like, when you tap into that, it's not just about, probably feels like it's about profits most of the time, but you get my point. Is there any farm, like, you're a farmer, right? Does that make sense? Like, that's where God's putting a physical world back together. And somewhere along the way, we made it all about whether or not you're going to heaven when you die, which is great and really important. But God's doing a much more holistic work. So if I can give every single one of my graduates that sense of that my work is holy and sacred, and it matters because it's partnering with God to bring shalom to the world's chaos, the physical, material work that I do, that's what we're after. So our goal is to try to build a mentoring network so that when Nathan graduates with his marketing degree, he fills out a profile upon graduation and gets linked up with 12 profiles, like BetterHelp Counseling, and 7 people that are in marketing just like him. And these 3 people have similar affinities to him. And these 2 people have people that have been doing the work for 20 years. And share a language, and they've been through a sense of training, and we all kind of share in this, and they can help Nathan know why marketing is more than just a job to get a paycheck. Like, this is why you get up to do what you do. Maybe somebody gets a job in marketing, but then ends up being a barista at Starbucks, and is like, I did not go to college to be a barista at Starbucks. Okay, well, let me hook you up with somebody that's done that, that's lived through that. They had to do that for 5 years. Let's talk about the person that wanted to go do something with their life and became a stay-at-home parent instead. Let me connect you with that. Let's say a student goes through a divorce because life happens. I can connect you to 4 people in our network that have gone through divorce. Like, I can help you find people that can, in community, walk with you and teach you how to do this in the real world, not just in the spiritual discipleship world of campus ministry. So we want to build that and have that platform going. We're in the prototype phase of that. But we used to always say, like, well, where are you going to find all those mentors? We would talk about this vision, and everybody would be like, well, where are you going to find all those people that are going to mentor college students? Well, luckily, we have a podcast where we have about 170,000 people listening to a podcast. So if I can convince some of them to sign up for our little mentor database, we'll be on to something. So first, we've got to build something that works so we can show people what it is when it's working right. And then we're going to start recruiting people into that. And I can't remember what question I'm answering at this point, but there's something about that. What's happening with students and the other part. So, I know, you were asking about the other part of my ministry. Yeah, me too. When I do this right, nobody remembers the question they ask. It's my way of dodging questions. So a lot of people have always viewed it as 2 separate things. It's actually one integrated thing, and I did a really poor job of ever framing it originally. When the podcast was starting to take off, I was trying to hide it because I didn't want it to be this big We're all tired of platform, celebrity, whatever. Like, we don't need. So I was trying to, like, don't look at the thing behind the curtain. But then it was getting bigger and bigger and more awkward, and the board of directors was like, you can't keep hiding this. So then I had to start trying to bring those 2 worlds together. That's been my life for the last 3 or 4 years. So that was what we've been up to. You had a hand go up.
Yeah, so this is kind of more technical question, but what makes a Jew, why are you a Jew? Versus Israeli.
Sure.
Versus.
Right.
And then how are you raising your kids
Yeah.
Spiritually, I guess?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's talk really big level, just the terminology. Let's go meta level and then hone in on it. So scholars will usually talk a lot about Hebrews. Hebrews would be Abraham. Hebrews would be the people wandering through the desert. They'll then start talking about Israelites when you start to have a nation somewhere around the settlement of Judges or the Davidic kingdom. They become Israelites scholastically. Academics will refer to Hebrews and Israelites, and they'll use those terms really particularly. Jews are going to arise at the exile. So historically, you're walking through references. The Hebrew people, Abraham. The Israelite people, David. The Jewish people, post-exile, because the word Jew simply means Judean. So Jews, or Jewish, simply is referring to when the 10 tribes became the northern land of Israel, and then they basically align themselves with Assyria and will end up becoming the Samaritans, that whole thing. That's why the Jews end up becoming the Jews, because the Jews are just talking about the land of Judah. Benjamin and Simeon kind of get absorbed into that, so now it's Jews. Jews just simply as shorthand. The word in the Greek is edoi. The word in Hebrew, for some reason, is totally escaped me because I always just call them Judahians because it's referring to the tribe of Judah. So that's Jews. So historically, so when you talk Israelis, Israeli is going to typically almost always refer to the modern nation state of Israel. And I find all those distinctions helpful because for me, I'm unsettled about how I view the modern state of Israel in relationship to the biblical covenant people of Israel. What do we do with that? Because there's Jews everywhere. What is this modern political state? Whoa. I was like, who's talking? That. What is this modern political state? And what is that in relationship? I'm not even sure I have a ton of great answers. I just know I want to be slow to just put them into the same bucket. Now there's the personal aspect of what you asked me about. So if you listen to the podcast, we will pull this apart in season 4 really in depth. So part of what we discovered, this is such a fun conversation to have on the fly. Can we do this? Sure we can. If not, nobody will be the wiser. You can just forget I was here. This is not the conversation you're looking for, and we'll just move on. So one of the things that, I wasn't raised in my Judaism because my parents were followers of Jesus, and they had a pretty typical understanding that probably is shared with, I would bet, many or most in the room, which is Jesus came, so why would it matter that you're Jewish? Like, Jesus came and kind of undid all that, so now there's just Christians. And my parents had that understanding, so I knew of my Jewish heritage, but I wasn't raised in my Jewish observance, if that makes any sense. I was just raised in my Christian evangelical upbringing, is the upbringing that I had. So then when I started studying with Ray was unpacking for us what was being called New Perspective on Paul scholarship. You could later refine that 10 years later by talking about Paul within Judaism scholarship. What is this? Where is it coming from? It's coming from scholarship that proceeded from the Dead Sea Scrolls. When we found the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 50s, everything changed in academia because we found out we had been making assumptions. We found a lot of good things, by the way, like our Bibles were totally accurate. We found out amazing things. The Dead Sea Scrolls were a great thing on all levels. But we also did find out some things Jews and Christians, by the way. We're some things got lost over the last 1,500 years. We didn't realize that for us it would be Jesus when we're reading the Gospels. We didn't realize that in Second Temple Judaism, when this is being said, this is what they meant. And so you pull all that apart, and what has always confounded scholars, let me hit a pause and back up 2 steps. What has always confounded scholars is Paul's relationship to the law. Paul keeps talking about you're not under the law. You're not under the works of the law. You're not under the works of the law. Paul's very you don't do the law. But then in Acts, Paul is repeatedly showing as observing the law, following the law, and James says that Paul teaches all Jews everywhere to follow the law. Scholars were always so scholars, liberal scholars, said, well, it's not the same Paul. These letters were written by Paul. These letters weren't written by Paul. This was made up by the church. This wasn't. And they just separated the New Testament. It's not inspired, yada, yada, yada. What we discovered was that there was a rabbinical debate going on in Second Temple Judaism pre-Jesus, 40 years before Jesus. There's a rabbi named Shammai. There's a rabbi named Hillel. Shammai's got an obedience. If you ask Shammai, what's the greatest commandments? Shammai says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might, and obey the Sabbath. Hillel says, he's his competitor. If you're watching The Chosen, Shammai's in The Chosen. Hillel's not because he's dead. They appropriately don't have him in The Chosen because he's dead at that point in history. But he was the competition when Shammai was younger. These 2 rabbinical schools that went at it. Hillel said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, might, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus didn't come up with that. Jesus took Hillel's side. Jesus took a side in the theological debate that was happening for 4 decades prior to him. Here's why that matters. It matters in about 8 different ways. There was about 8 rabbinical debates that we could talk about. But the one that I'm referring to, related to your question, is what do we do with all these Gentiles? Because these Gentiles are coming to synagogue. This is pre-Jesus. 40 years before Jesus, 100 years before Jesus. Gentiles are coming to synagogue because they don't love the Roman pantheon. Like, it's not great. Like, if you're not into sexual immorality and getting drunk every month on wine and eating raw meat, like, you're looking for other alternatives. Nobody laughed at that, but you're looking for other alternatives. And Judaism, the God of Israel, is attractive. So you're being drawn to go to synagogue. And Jews are going, what do we do? Like, these Gentiles, they're not circumcised. They don't follow Torah. They don't have kosher clothing. They probably had bacon before they came into church. And they're just coming in, and they're just sitting, what do we do? Well, all the Jews were like, well, we're glad you're here. No Jews wanted to kick them out. They just were having a theological conversation about what do we do with them? What does it mean that they're here? And Shammai said, well, if you want to be justified, if you want God to call you righteous, you have to follow Torah. God sees your Torah observance as righteousness. So it's good that they're here, but if they want to be righteous, it doesn't matter. They're all wasting their time unless they want to become Jews. They can get circumcised, they can follow Torah, they can eat kosher, they can become Jewish, and then God can see them as righteous. We're glad that they're here, it just doesn't do them any good, essentially. Now, for a Jew, they're not worried about salvation. It's a completely separate conversation, but if it's helpful, you can think of it that way, I guess, for us. Hillel took a different stance. Hillel said, no. If I go to the story of Abraham, Abraham was justified and it was credited to him as righteousness. That's in Genesis 15. When God says you're going to have a kid through you, Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. So Abraham experiences justification in Genesis 15. Circumcision, the first commandment Abraham is given, is in Genesis 17. Hillel says you can't be justified based on your observance because Abraham is justified on the basis of faith. All he did was believe God and he was justified. So it has nothing to do with your Torah observance. And that's good news for Gentiles, Hillel said, because they're not a part of the Jewish family, but they can receive justification simply by trusting in the promises of God. They're not under the Sinai covenant. They didn't sit at Sinai. They don't eat kosher. But they can find justification by God because they trust in his promises. They trust in his love. They trust in whatever God promises God makes to them. They trust and they're justified. We didn't know all this prior to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now we know this. We learned that there was a scroll called BECC Ma'aseh HaTorah, scroll number 4. And we learned in that scroll that the Jews had actually talked about the law in Second Temple Judaism in a way we didn't realize before. They talked about the part of the law that was cultic. I don't mean cultic in a bad way. I mean temple, requires a priesthood, requires an altar. There's the cultic law, sacrifice, priesthood. Anything that has to be done in the temple is cultic law. Jesus followers, we would say Jesus fulfills the cultic law. He's the sacrifice. He's the priesthood. That's the book of Hebrews, right? There's the ethical law. I don't know if you've ever been in a Bible study and you're like, praise God, we're not under the law. And everybody's like, yeah, praise God. And then somebody's like, what about the 10 Commandments? And you're like, feels like a pretty good list to me. Like, this is really awkward. Like, we're not under do not murder. It feels like we should be under do not murder. But that's because the 10 Commandments are an example of what Jews called ethical law. It's not a covenantal agreement. It just is. It just is. It's ethical law. It just is the way that it's just morality. It's just ethics. Then there's the part of the law that's about Judaism. It's what you stepped under when you got circumcised and sat at Sinai and said, we will follow this covenant. That's the Jewish covenant, and that's BECC Ma'aseh HaTorah, which translates in English to the works of the law. The works of the law. The works of the law. In Greek, ergu namu, works of the law. Now we go back to Paul, and we realize that what Paul is doing is Paul's having a very Hillel-centered Jewish debate about the law. You're not justified by being Jewish. He's not saying don't follow the law. He's saying you're not justified by following the law, which is why Gentiles, it's good news for them. Now, Paul takes it further than Hillel did, because Hillel would have said, you're not a part of the family. Paul says, if you believe, you're adopted kids. You're full on, in Romans he says grafted in. In Galatians he says adopted. You're not distant cousins sitting in the balcony. You're full-fledged brothers or sisters. No Jew would have, like you read your book of Acts, there's not a Jew in the book of Acts that has a problem with the resurrection. Like, just pay attention. Paul shows up and preaches the resurrection. Jesus is Messiah. Crucifixion. Nobody has a problem. They're like, come back next week. Can't wait to hear your next sermon. Paul's sermon number 2 is always the same thing. Gentiles are full-fledged brothers and sisters in the gospel. And that's when they take him to stone him. It's not Jesus that they stone him over. It's Gentiles that they stone him over. Almost without exception every time in the book of Acts. Have fun looking that up. So what that did for scholarship, New Perspective on Paul scholarship says, oh, Jews have a place in God's New Testament family. Gentiles have a full place in God's New Testament family. Jews don't stop being Jews. Gentiles don't become Jews. Jew and Gentile together. That's why Paul says there's neither slave nor free, male nor female, neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. Are there still men and women? Yeah, there's still men and women. Like, the distinctions are still there, but they're on equal standing. There's still Jew and Greek. That's not obliterated, just like male and female aren't obliterated. There's still those realities, but they're just one. So the gospel community is one. We're Jews, Torah observant Jews. So I'm going to wear my kippah and wear my tassels and eat kosher and have kosher clothing. I'm going to follow Torah. My kids, to answer your question, this is a really long answer to your question. To answer that, my kids, my wife, they stepped under that covenant. My kids follow. My son wears kippah and tassels. My daughter was bat mitzvahed a few years ago. My son was bar mitzvahed last year. So we are Torah observant followers of Jesus. We don't attend synagogue. I'm a part of a larger Messianic fellowship called Yachad B'Yeshua. There's a couple hundred of us in that. There are 3 caucuses. There's a Catholic Orthodox caucus, which is awesome. There are Catholic priests that are Torah observant Jews. How awesome is that? Okay. And then there is a Messianic caucus for all the folks that attend a Messianic synagogue. And then there is a Protestant Reformed caucus, which is what I'm a part of, for everybody that finds themselves in an evangelical or a Protestant space.
So then, to be Torah observant, do you need to be by blood?
It's going to be a messy conversation, but that's how I would, yes. If you're not ethically Jewish, I would say your New Testament says, don't be Jewish, it's not your call. If you are ethically Jewish, I think the New Testament would say you're a part of a covenant, an everlasting covenant with God that you ought to uphold. It's kind of your role in the world to be that. But Paul's really adamant. See, it's very popular within the Hebrew roots movement today to be like, Gentiles should all start following Torah. Gentiles should start doing festivals, and you should start eating kosher, and you should become Jewish. I think the New Testament says absolutely not. If you do that, you ruin the gospel. The gospel is the gospel because you and I are in the same room right now. And we could go, I don't know if you have it downstairs. Do you have it downstairs here?
Yeah.
Is that where you have your potlucks?
No.
Darn it. Over there? We could go over there and we could have a potluck. In the Jewish world, I couldn't. I couldn't go eat with you over there because a Gentile and an Orthodox Jew can't eat together. But that's the gospel. The gospel is that you and I could go dine together because dining in the world of the Bible means we're in fellowship together. And there's nothing that separates us. That's the gospel. So yeah, that's my understanding, is ethnic. Now, but that just gets messy. Because because Jews today say it's maternal. Bible says it's paternal. Which one do you go by and why? Because both of them feel weird. Christians, I think, were like, do what I did. I'm going to go by the Bible. That's great, but that is a Judaism that hasn't existed for 2,000. So that was the Judaism of Jesus. But then Judaism went on a 2,000-year evolution. Christianity went on a 2,000-year evolution. And now somebody like me is stuck. Which one is my authority? It feels weird to say Judaism over here is my authority. That feels weird. But it also feels weird to say a Judaism that no longer exists. But it still feels like the best option to me, so that's what I do. But it gets really tricky and really hard. Because then when you get to know Jews today, I can't what do we do with that? What do I do when I'm in a room with non-Jesus following Jews? How do I honor who they are when they feel like I'm appropriating something? It's a big deal for me as a follower of Jesus to try to respect them and show them grace. So it's messy. It's like super messy. So just had lunch 2 weeks ago on this trip with somebody who is maternally Jewish. So Jews around them, Jews today would be like, yeah, you're Jewish. Your mom was an observant Jew. You're Jewish. They would say, I'm not Jewish. According to Torah, I'm Jewish, and they're not. What do we do? What do we do? Tradition.
Which tradition?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So, in your perception, or the people that you know, is anti-Semitism increasing, like the news?
That's such a good question. Such a good question. I don't know. I don't know.
Because, the media would tell us that it's just exploding, the hate for Jews.
Yeah, and I would say there's definitely truth to that. At the same time, it's just also a part of where our culture's at, trying to figure itself out and figuring out how to express itself and the way it reacts against everything else. Because I would think of all my Palestinian friends, and I would be like, well, it's kind of a weird time to cry anti-Semitism when the UN told us today that 12,000 kids are going to die if they don't get aid in the next 48 hours. Now, I know, what does the UN know? I get that, but it's still like, it's hard. It's a hard time right now. And I have lunch on Saturday night with a Palestinian friend in Seattle that wants to sit down and talk with me about my place when I do trips over to Israel, and why I do this and not that, and why I say this and not that. And I deeply appreciate that. I respect that. Is anti-Semitism on the rise? Yeah. But so is a lot of hate right now from both corners, conservative and progressive. So it's hard to pull apart.
I thought you would get to it eventually, but you are still making trips to Israel.
I wondered that.
Yeah, we're hoping. Every time I put out a video and say, we're going, they launch another rocket. So feels like they have a direct line to my Facebook feed. So yeah, we are on, the plan is to go in 26. We've got a low contact in March. Low contact is essentially no hiking. It's geared for people that are just not as physically able to do a full contact tour. The full contact tour happens in October now. It is 7 to 12 miles of hiking a day. It's 1,800 feet, 2,000 feet of elevation change a day. It's relatively rigorous. It's pretty rigorous. And then we have the low contact, so like a few miles cumulative hiking. We're going to take the bus to the top of the mountain rather than hike to the top of the mountain, that kind of idea. You still have to walk around the sites and stuff, but so that's low contact and full contact. And we go to Turkey in June in the middle. So every other year I do those 3 tours. In 24, I had to make everything a Turkey tour because we couldn't go over to Israel. I was in the airport for a private tour with a bunch of philanthropists on October 7th. We were standing at the gate trying to figure out if we wanted to get on the plane or not. We decided not to get on the plane, watching our phones and getting calls from the ground crew and stuff. So we're hoping. We had been undefeated until COVID, and then we were undefeated until this most recent conflict. I've been over during all kinds of conflicts. We should be completely fine to be over there in 26. It's whether or not you can convince people, because everybody watches the news. Whatever news they watch the news and they get a different picture than. I just got an email Monday. Maybe it was Friday, I guess. Time is a blur on a 33-day road trip. But on Friday, I got a message from another company that's taking tours over there, and she gave me an update on She said they had absolutely no issues, and they were there when the rocket landed at Tel Aviv. And she said we just had no issues. They were even up. They were all the way up north at. I didn't think they would be at Dan. They're at Dan. They're at Caesarea Philippi. They're on the Golan for a day. I didn't think that would be accessible, but she said they were all there and had no security issues at all, and there's nobody over there. So here's to hoping. So that's our Hopin' 26. And everything's going to change 3 more times in between now and when it matters. That's what I try to tell everybody. Is don't worry about it now, worry about it in 6 months, 9 months. That's when it's going to make the difference, not right now. Everything's going to change a bunch. We've moved to a random selection process now, because in 24 the trips got waitlisted in 20 minutes. So unless you had the liberty of sitting at work and just waiting for the newsletter to come out, you missed it and you had to get waitlisted. So we decided to let people pre-register for 3 weeks, and then we take that list and we just ask Siri to pick a number between 1 and whatever, and she randomly selects people for us. So that's how we're doing it now. So we've already done all of our lottery pick for low contact for 26. That trip's filled. So next week, in 10 days, the newsletter goes out for Turkey, and we'll do Turkey. And then in September or October, the newsletter go out for full contact Israel.
Okay, so I'm just curious.
Yeah.
So as a couple, if we both want to go in the lottery system,
Yeah.
if potentially.
We put you in as parties. We put you in as a party.
Okay,
1 selection per party, but we put you in as a party of 2.
okay,
And then if your number gets picked, we just fill it up. We go until we fill it up and
gotcha.
do that. So
For some reason, I was thinking Turkey was pretty hostile.
Turkey's amazing. I was over there during the coup, which is as bad as it's ever gotten. The airport got bombed and there was a coup, political coup there, and I was over there during that time. And we're never you're only going to sense tension in 2 places. The metros, the cities, Antalya and Istanbul, we're never there. I'm like in the south and the archaeological stuff. Or if you were to go far enough east that you're looking towards Syria when stuff gets crazy and interesting over there. But the part of Turkey we're in, I've never had a single issue in Turkey ever. I'm far more worried about earthquakes in Turkey than I am. And that's not saying that there are earthquakes all the time, but you're more likely to have to deal with something like that than any hostile, anything like that. Turkey's great. Turkey's amazing. Turkey's my favorite trip. Don't tell anybody that, but Turkey's way better than Israel, in my opinion. But nobody believes me, so I don't have to worry about people not coming to Israel. I keep trying to tell them that. But what else? Oh goodness, look at that. Oh, I guess it's only been an hour. Are we good to go till 8? You guys okay with that? Okay, sure. By the way, I do have a box of books over here if anybody wants them. I'm not just here to try to get you to buy books or anything like that, but I do have books if anybody wants those. The book is essentially the podcast and a book. So it basically walks through your biblical library and just says when you're sitting in this part of your biblical library, Torah, here's the questions you would want to ask. When you're in history, ask these questions. When you're in poetry, ask these questions. When you're in the Gospels, ask these questions. What about apocalyptic literature? There's a chapter for every section of the biblical library. And I always joke that if you get to the end of the book and you're like, I want more, then that's when you go to the podcast. There are currently 453 more chapters of a deeper dive. So, but I have those too if we want to spend any time with that. I may even leave a bunch behind because I love Bickleton and I'm trying to get rid of books. And I really don't want to carry them out here.
So how often, Marty, are you making any podcasts?
We release one every Thursday. We sometimes do bonus episodes when The Chosen is out. Our Chosen commentary is a Monday bonus episode. We'll do other random ideas sometimes as bonus episodes, but we always have a Thursday. Right now we're in the middle of a reboot. So we're rebooting season 1. So when I got to season 6, we added teachers to the team. We didn't realize that people were listening to the podcast till season 3. So if you're listening to the podcast and you're in season 1 and 2, we're talking to your kids, like your college students. We're assuming that they're a part of our larger programming. We're assuming that they're coming to other things. We're assuming that that's who we're talking to. And it's season 3 in the Gospels when we look up and go, I think there's a lot of people listening to this. And then we get a new podcast host, we get some better data, and we realize we have a lot of people listening. And that's when everything, we kind of like change our, we kind of slowly change our posture and our tone and the way we talk. But it was time to go back and kind of redo. So we're starting at the beginning. We recorded all of session 1, and then we're releasing one reboot episode every week. And they replaced the old episodes. So the old episodes you can still get to through the show notes. But the new episode 1 is where the old episode 1 used to be. It actually has the same dates that our podcast feed stays the same. And then we're going to get through that in about September. We'll get through season 1. We're going to let it breathe right now because Brent is at the end of his production. He's about ready to crash. So we need to let him have a little bit of a break. And then we'll start recording again probably next year for season 2. Then we get that recorded, we'll start releasing. We'll stagger it out like that. So we're doing 1 a week for sure, usually 2. And we record them in batches. We're usually recorded 3 months out. So we're recorded right now through August, September. So.
What do you think is the most difficult part of the Bible to help people understand because of the depth of the wording, everything about it? Most people say Revelation, but I listened to a podcast and the person said it's one of the easiest.
That's a new way to frame it. I like that. That's optimistic. I like that. I would agree on some level. If you get comfortable with the hermeneutic, Revelation, and I'd love to know where that person is coming from with how they interpret it, but if you're comfortable with your hermeneutic, Revelation should not be a challenge, but it usually is. I think for most people it totally is. But it's because you got to figure out how to apply that hermeneutic to a very unique genre of literature, because apocalyptic literature is unique. And it's not like, you can't do the same thing that you do with 2 Samuel with Revelation, or Ezekiel, or Zechariah. It's just a different piece of literature. That's part of the reason why I wanted to do that with what I did in my book. I would say, I would put that at the top of the list for the average Bible student, apocalyptic literature. But I think I would say stories of the conquest, stories of wrath, stories of, I think that's some of the hardest, because of the way we've systematized that theologically. We just like assume God's wrath. We have a very Augustinian influence and model of theology. And I don't think wrath is supposed to be assumed the way that we assume it. And so I think that's part of the hard part of pulling that apart in a way that doesn't freak people out and allows them to still wrestle with the text. I have an episode in season 2 on the book of Joshua. I call it the hardest story in the Bible for me. That's the title of the episode, the hardest story in the Bible for me.
Really?
Because conquest narrative is just difficult. If I believe in Jesus, like if I look at Jesus as if I have a Christocentric hermeneutic where Jesus is ultimately everything looks like Jesus, is fulfilled in Jesus, is interpreted like Jesus. I have a quote in the book from Brian Zond. Brian Zond says, one of my favorite quotes. He says, God is like Jesus. God has always been like Jesus. There was never a time when God was not like Jesus. We haven't always known this, but now we do. I love that quote. I'll say it one more time. God is like Jesus. God has always been like Jesus. There was never a time when God was not like Jesus. We haven't always known this, but now we do. And that is why conquest is hard, because conquest has to look like Jesus. So how do I do that? Jesus says, love my enemies. How do I square a story of conquest with a Jesus that says, love my enemies, and puts that on display? And it's still the hardest thing for me to wrestle with, if I'm honest. Because I have to be honest. I can make the Bible say whatever I want it to say. But if I'm honest about what is the Bible saying here, that's the hardest thing to wrestle with. for me. But poetry is tricky too. Cosmology. The cosmology, people might have read Dr. Michael Heiser. He did a book called The Unseen Realm. Ancient Jewish cosmology is totally weird, what they assume about the cosmos and how it's ordered and structured. That can be wild. It can be a wild ride. It'll make you wonder if you know anything about anything. But yeah.
It seems like the more I find out, the more I get to that point.
Yeah, I just said that in Boise. Yeah, the more I learn and the more I mature, the more I grow, the more I know, but simultaneously the more I don't know.
That's right.
And in the most healthy way, which is why I just take less and less. People are always like, you're getting softer as you get older. I'm not sure there's another option if we're honest, because all I know is that it's more complicated than I thought it was when I was 26. It's more, I'm more convicted than ever, but I'm also more confident that there's all kinds of things I only see a limited scope of it. Like it's not that I'm losing my convictions. I'm actually more convicted, but I also am like, yeah, but there's so much that I'm not considering and that I don't see and God sees. And I hear somebody else over here talk about it in their shoes and I'm like, whoa. So, yeah.
My high school science teacher likened it to a circle, where the inside of the circle is what you know, but the edge of the circle is what you don't know.
Yes.
So as your circle of knowledge grows bigger, you understand that what you don't know also increases.
Yes, totally. Yeah, that's
And I've
absolutely
always
right.
thought that was a great analogy.
Yeah, I'll turn that into a YouTube video someday and act like that was my idea.
So it's not just me.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so Jesus is the easy answer.
Yeah.
What character in the Bible do you enjoy the most or find the most fascinating?
Oh, well, this question could get me in trouble if I'm not careful.
We listen and we don't judge.
Yeah. My campus minister heart just smiled. It just grew 3 sizes just now. I'm drawn. There's a few that I'm drawn to. Personally, I just continue to be mesmerized by Peter. So the Rabbit Room with Andrew Peterson's asked us to start partnering with them. They asked us to come down and do a teaching they're going to video in Nashville. I actually get to give it in front of Tolkien's fireplace, so that's awesome. But I want to call it Bilbo and the Bible, and I'm going to compare the story of Samwise in Lord of the Rings to Peter, and just like how we fail, like our deepest convictions we fail, but then we remain faithful to those things, and that's where the redemption lies. So I'm mesmerized by the Peter narrative, but that's somewhat selfish. It's just very me. It's a very narcissistic answer. I'm also learning right now in grad work, a lot about Mary of Magdalene, or Mary Migdal, or whatever we should be calling her. I'm fascinated by her character and history. But then I like continue to wrestle with Jacob and Joseph. Anybody that's listened to the podcast knows I'm really hard on both of them. And I make a lot of listeners really upset. They're like, you're so hard on these patriarchs. It's like, yeah, because they're jerks. And I think Joseph is a total narcissist that doesn't get redeemed till the end. But that's my own take on it. But anyway, unpopular opinion. So I just keep wrestling with those stories. I think Rabbi David Foreman has some of the best material on Jacob and Joseph that I've ever encountered. It's so good. It's so good. So anyway, that's my short answer. That's my 4. I give you 4 people. And I dodged the one that would get me in trouble. Anything else, or should we pray?
Not going to take any more.
This is what I love to do. I love to. This is so much fun with. Yeah, everywhere I go, it's fun. Well, let me pray, and we're going to pray for Scott for sure. I'm sure there's probably others, but he's the one I know. I'll pray for Scott. Jesus, we are, I personally am thankful to be back here again. My heart smiles when I get to come out to Bickleton, Washington. It is always just a joy of a trip and a great place to come through and to have you keep bringing me through. So thank you for that. Thank you for faces that I recognize, and for a night just of encouraging each other and asking good questions and stimulating our own just theological brains and all of that. God, I think of some of our last reflections of how little we know, and the more we know, the less we feel like we know. I just pray you'd make us real comfortable in that spot. Like that you would remind us that there are three things you've asked of us and required of us, and that is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. And I just pray for that humility, that we would constantly remind ourselves we really have no idea what we're doing, and it's okay. Like we're doing our best to listen for your voice, and we give you the best that we got, and we build buildings and structures and policy and procedure manuals, and we worship as churches, and we build relationships together, and we try to be faithful, and we go to work, and we try to steward the life you've given us to steward to the best of our ability. I pray that offering is one that makes you smile, even though we know how imperfect it is, day in and day out. So I pray for all of those, all the folks here in this fellowship. I pray for all the folks that are out working tonight and all those things. I also pray for Scott, and I pray for his continued recovery, whatever it is that he's dealing with. Having gotten back here stateside, we pray that you'd give doctors insight, that you would direct their steps and allow them to see things they need to see, that you'd be in the things like blood work and tests and other things that they monitor, so that all this wholeness would show up. And when it does, we will not forget to give you credit for working through people that have a passion for what they do as nurses and doctors and lab techs and everything else. So Jesus, just take care of us. Lead and guide and direct our steps. Provide for our families. Keep us safe. Look out for our kids if they are away from here and moving on with their life in other places. Help lead and guide and direct them as well. We love you. Pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for coming out on a Tuesday
No, thank you, Marty.
to Bickleton. Sorry, I just keep saying that. You guys are like, we live here. So much fun to come out here.
Down in Australia, they have a place called the Black Stump.
Yeah?
That's the end of nowhere.
That's the,
And
okay.
Bickleton is just the other side.
Other side of the black stuff.